So you'll hear a lot of the similar comments and opinions, but everybody on this panel is actively involved in structuring EB-5 transactions. So what we're going to do is I'm going to let each panel member introduce themselves and then talk about what bellwether topics they think are critical in structuring, and each one can give their own opinion. Go ahead, start, Michael. Michael, go ahead, introduce yourself and proceed. Thank you, everybody.
Hey everyone, thanks for being here. Good to see everyone again. I'm Mike Schoenfeld.
Guys, can we just quiet it down a little? Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Mike Schoenfeld from EB-5AN. We own 15 regional centers. We've worked with over 2,000 investors across all of our regional centers and have sponsored many deals all across the country. So currently we're primarily focused on structuring high quality deals that work in rural and urban TEAs and that are well positioned for the current economic environment with rising interest rates and the uncertainty in the future.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces with a little bit less hair after this hiatus. My name is Alejandro Navia. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for Driftwood Capital. Driftwood Capital is one of the lead owner-operators of hotels in the US. We now own and operate a portfolio of 90 hotels. We've been building, acquiring, and operating these hotels since the late 90s. At this point, we're building about 3 to 4 hotels a year. Since 2015, we started using the EB-5 program very successfully, especially tackling the Latin American market. To date, 5 projects has come to fruition, of which 2 we paid fully back to investors. Another 2 are going there, and the last one is in construction phase right now. Certainly the last 2 years have been, even though we didn't have any EB-5, has been very, very busy on the EB-5 world. Through investor relations and distributions, a lot of investors obviously wanting to get their I-526 approved and adjudicated has been an issue. From the structuring side, one of the things that we saw early on was that we wanted to keep a conservative leverage even with the EB-5. So our play was basically to replace some of the loan from the senior lender with EB-5 instead of doing on top of the senior lender. And what we did as a little bit different than everybody else back then was that if somebody wanted to come in above the leverage that the bank was giving us, they became partners, making great returns, and so far has played out really well in Latin America, where you have investors are sophisticated. So great to be back in the EB-5 world again.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to speak. My name is Jim Long. I manage the EB-5 project for the Hall Group. Hall Group is one of the premium developer in Dallas, Texas. I work with my partner, Regional Center UCD over here, and we structure mainly is in the Dallas, Texas, and also Frisco, one of the 2 most exciting real estate market in the country. And we have both the TEA and non-TEA project. We try to be more investor friendly, make sure we are stand out in the market with the agents, with the investors. Thank you.
Tom Martin, Managing Director of Baker Tilly. Baker Tilly is a full service accounting firm with offices coast to coast, and I manage the EB-5 practice. We're the people that usually get the email first because we determine if their site qualifies for TEA and how many jobs are typically created. So we prepare kind of the pre-operating package of the business plan and economic analysis. Probably the number 1 question we get from people today is my project rural? Because I looked online and the USDA says it's rural, or I looked over here and it says it's rural, or it's just there's nothing around it except for trees and bushes, so it must be rural. The answer to that question typically is, well, let's go take a look. And we'll see if it falls in a rural area, and then we can look and see back the napkin on how many jobs are created, and ultimately those 2 pieces of information determine usually whether the project can move forward. So we're usually your first conversation. We're happy to have that with you.
Wonderful having you here. My name is Aaron Schekta. I'm Managing Director at Golden Gate Global. We are a regional center based in San Francisco, California. We manage over $1 billion. Most of our funds are coming from EB-5, mostly on the West Coast projects. We also have non-immigration related debt funds as well. So we're more like a structured capital firm. And I think the bigger kind of a critical component of structuring deals in this post-RIA world is one, obviously, as my fellow panelists mentioned about the locations, the rural, urban TAA, et cetera, but also the timing, because now there are tremendous amount of wonderful projects out there, and a lot of interest from developers in this high interest kind of an environment. But then there are a lot of new requirements for new applications, licensing, new kind of forms from USCIS that you have to first do before you can go on the market. So how do you time structuring the deal from an underwriting standpoint and then successfully structure an offering and be on the market? It's actually a difficult problem now. So I think that's one of the critical aspects that we're currently discussing internally as well. And I think we can discuss with this panel.
Well, let me throw out a question to the audience, go the panel one at a time. What's your system of underwriting transactions? Is structuring, part of the structuring is underwriting. Now, the interesting part is we have very different panel members here. Some panel members own regional centers, maybe the developer, or will own regional centers, a developer. Others are independent, not affiliated with the developer. There is a difference from a compliance standpoint as to how many places you serve. There's a regional center, there's a sponsor, and there's a developer. Sometimes, which is common, one group it does all three, which is a different issue. But how do you underwrite and how do you handle it? Mike, why don't you take that first?
Sure. Yeah, appreciate that. So we are not developers ourselves. We own regional centers all across the country. And our philosophy is that we always want to be independent. We evaluate projects as any equity or debt investor would and look at it, does this pencil, even before we think about EB-5. So never taking in the development role, always looking out for the investors. But what we're looking for now are projects that are already fully capitalized and underway, and ones that still make sense in a higher interest rate environment. So for example, a couple of the new deals that we've worked on recently, we're looking at single family home deals where the land has already been purchased, the infrastructure is in, and it's on a rolling basis. So the jobs are created and it can flex up and down with the economic cycle. If we have a very nasty recession, we're able to hold on to it and see it through. And if everything returns back to normal, no issues at all. So what we're doing is just trying to look from a more conservative mindset of we've had a great run really since 2008. It's been a long time since we've gone through one of these cycles. And we always want to find deals that have the capital in place and where we have a clear path to exit.
Next. We'll go down the road because each one will have their own opinion. You each
Yeah,
have
well-
different perspective. So we want to
Yeah.
hear this.
We're a little different. We are actually the developer, and what we look at is if the project makes sense. First and foremost, we're hotel developers, so EB-5 is not our business. We just replace some of the capital that we're going to set aside from our own capital and the bank with EB-5 just to sweeten the deal a little bit more for us. But we don't look if it's rural, we don't look if it's not rural, if it's TEA or non-TEA, we're in the hotel business. So if it makes sense, we'll do it. And then after we have everything structured on the capital stack with the bank and our own capital, then is when we bring in the EB-5 to replace both sides a little bit on each side. We've used regional centers that we rent before, and we've had great collaborations with some of the most well-known regional centers. And we raise our own capital, so we just rent them. We go and we believe that if we're gonna be using your money as an investor, they wanna be directly involved and they have an open door policy at our office and they know we have an answer for them anytime they need one. So that's why we kept it like that. And now that the regional centers are authorized again for another 5 years, we're probably going to create our own regional centers from now.
Jim, you go.
And we are very fortunate working with Hall Group. Hall has like 3 major divisions. They build the real estate big project, mixed use, always mixed use, around 300 to $1 billion per project. They also manage about $2 billion asset in commercial project. Finally, they do about $1 billion hotel construction mezzanine loan around the country. They are the #1 non-bank private construction lender. So they have many flexibility. They pick up project in best location, so it's not a worry. When we decide whether to do a EB-5, is whether we can market and sell the project in a proper time. So that's our only criteria. We always have the money to back it up if we cannot raise money, but we want to make sure our structure is good for the market.
Yeah, and I see things on a different perspective because we see folks all across the spectrum that come in through our shop and just say, hey, can my project get ready for EB-5? And we're there in the preparation of that business plan. And so as we're writing that, we're kind of underwriting it with that mindset and, in mind is this project feasible? What we're seeing a lot is folks having kind of docs and things put together that were done prior to COVID. So we're seeing, feasibility studies from early 2020 or 2019, or we're seeing construction bids from, mid 2020, and we're coming back and we're going, there's no way these are still valid. Like the world is completely different. You need to go back and recheck that. So we're part of that process in the early stages of just kind of making sure everything's as current and up to date as possible. But what we're seeing from USCIS is that they really want to see that shovel-ready project kind of all being penciled out.
In our case, like Mike, we are an independent regional center, so we're not a developer. So our underwriting has 3 main kind of stages, right? So we look into projects financially, transactionally, and from a marketing standpoint. So financially, obviously we go through like any private equity real estate firm, we look into the details, the kind of do our due diligence. And also we like to work with developers who have staying power. And the more sophisticated you go, the less risk you take as an underwriter and as an issuer. And I think this environment right now is fantastic for that because similar to right after 2010, right, a lot of big developers are looking into EB-5 with a more serious kind of a mindset. And this gives us a lot of ability to speak with very sophisticated developers. And I think that's great. From a transactional standpoint, I'm a lawyer. I mean, I think the managing partner in the firm is a lawyer, so we're extremely conservative. So we analyze projects from the different aspects on a transactional base to make sure that every transaction, every contract within that deal makes sense, and we feel comfortable about it. And then the last thing is marketing wise, right? What do investors want? Different markets when we go into the market? Does it make sense? Is it marketable? It could be an amazing project in the middle of nowhere, like setting aside obviously rural projects, but it may not appeal to the foreign market. So it may be a really difficult process for your sales folks to go out and try to market that project. So then you change your vision a little bit and look into a little bit more kind of in quotes sexier projects and see if they pencil out. So there are different layers of kind of like a funnel, and then the dripping down projects are really high quality projects, and that's what we look for.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on this. EB-5 to some degree is counter-cyclical. What I mean by that is we had the Great Recession, 08, 09, EB-5 came alive. Because it became a filling capital, and it really, a lot of projects were done that wouldn't have been done without EB-5 capital. We're not there yet, but we're obviously hitting those headwinds. It's obvious interest rates have gone up. Senior lenders are cutting back on their loan to cost basis. Their rates have gone up. So what does that mean for EB-5? Number one, EB-5 rates are becoming more reasonable. When you look at the rate being charged, the total cost of the deal is actually not really necessarily any more than a senior loan today. Senior loans are 8% today. And recourse, partial recourse, and it's difficult. And they have a lot of expenses, and it's cumbersome. So, and as the prior panel commented on, EB-5 is now $800,000 per investor. Now think about it. That's 60% increase in capital per job creation. You'd have to create 10 jobs. You just got an extra $300,000 for the same 10 jobs. All of a sudden, you can start penciling out EB-5 deals, potentially being senior financing on a first mortgage. I'll leave that down. Got to listen to me. Put your glasses on. This is your speech. You got to hear me. So the message is EB-5 really, in many respects, with the Integrity Act, with the 60% increase in funding, and with the markets today much more difficult, all of a sudden you can make a deal. I'll give you an example, and I want to ask the panel this. It's called the capital stack. I want you to all comment on the capital stack. How do you structure a deal? I'll give you the parameters and I'll let you guys talk about it and what you see. So what do you have? You have EB-5. You have the first developer equity coming in. How much developer equity do you need? And second, does developer equity include appraised land value as opposed to capital in? Second question, please take notes on this, guys. I'm just joking. And three, if you have a senior loan, you may need a much smaller senior loan now because EB-5 can fill in. In other words, Ali, as for your comment, if you have a small senior loan and a larger EB-5 loan, the risk factor is much less because the chance of foreclosure on a 40% senior loan is much less than a 70% senior loan. So given these parameters, I'd like the panel to comment on the capital stack issue, because really that's a prep for everybody in this room. That is, I'm a deal guy, I'm a structure guy, I'm a financial guy, and I really worry about the first thing I tell clients is let's get your capital stack together and see if it's marketable and see what the safety factors are. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'd say historic the last couple of years, well, before EB-5 really slowed down, it was pretty simple. If you were doing a new hotel deal, it was $100 million. You chop it up, 60 million for the senior loan, 20 million of EB-5 mezz, 20 million of developer equity. It was a pretty standard balance.
2020, that was typical, yeah.
Just to keep it simple. Well, what we're seeing now is that there's actually a lot more room for creativity in the capital stacks, as Ronnie was mentioning. But then in addition to that, you also have to be more conservative than before, where there were some issues during COVID where projects were over-levered. When they were counting the increasing land value and developer equity, they put on that 60% senior loan, they put on mezzanine debt, and then COVID hit and people breached covenants. So now that we're in this new world, one of the types of deals that we're really focused on, as I mentioned before, are the single family home deals where the developers purchase the land in cash or is very little acquisition financing. They have a revolving construction facility that will never blow up in a sense because you're usually funding pre-sold homes. And then we're able to slot the EB-5 in where technically it's subordinate debt. But when you have a revolving facility like that, that's backed by something specific, it feels a little bit more like senior. So we're still looking at some hospitality deals, some multifamily deals, and other things like that. But what we're finding is that the leverage that we're willing to go to is significantly lower because the project that used to work at 80% loan to value, when you add in the EB-5 and the senior, when the senior loan is all of a sudden up at 8%, and then you layer in the EB-5, it just doesn't pencil anymore. And if you're heading into a recession and you have a hospitality deal and your ADR goes down and your occupancy isn't what you think, the deal that looked great on paper a year ago, like just doesn't work. So we're being very cautious on that, but it does allow for the creativity of where the EB-5 fits in, and it can be senior. There are projects where it makes sense because there's plenty of jobs being created where at 800,000, we really don't see jobs as an issue anymore because however you fit the EB-5 into the capital stack, even as senior, there's going to be plenty of jobs in a ground up development. So that's generally how we're looking at capital structures for now.
No, 100. This is good because this is right up your alley. Go ahead.
Yeah, from our point of view, we from the get-go, and we still sticking to our fundamentals where we don't like to over leverage our projects. They mentioned staying power, and I think staying power mainly comes if you correctly structure your project. And typically we don't let it go over a 65% leverage, including EB-5. And on the early days, we were looking at projects that were 85, 90% leverage with EB-5. And we were saying, like, how are they going to refinance this thing? In 5 years, everything needs to go absolutely perfect in order to be able to pay back the EB-5 and not get in trouble. So that's why we said, listen, let's keep it at 65 max of leverage. That's where we feel comfortable. And then everybody else that wants to come in over the 65 leverage mark, they can become our partners. We have EB-5 investors who are doubling their money and getting a green card, which is amazing. I'm happy for them, you know, and they helped our project and we're helping them. And now we have over 180 families that have been successful at this EB-5. So yeah, leverage, keep it low, using EB-5. Now we can get creative and probably replace all the bank because all of a sudden, probably we can charge the project less than the bank would with EB-5. So that's going to be interesting. There's a perfect storm these days with interest rates going up, and basically, at least Latin America is on fire. Every single country besides Ecuador is now on the socialist side, so everybody wants to get out.
Yeah, by the way, that's a very important comment of the prior panel. It wasn't really their topic, but it's your topic that you're structuring deals. Not only is EB-5 counter-cyclical, but the worst is, this is going to sound Machiavellian, but the worse things are in the world, the better for EB-5. Why? Because people want to come here more. I'm not trying to,
Yeah,
I don't want to be too optimistic, but this is still probably the number one. This and maybe a few other countries are probably the number one target country to come to in the world, given this, you know, at the end of the day, the stability of the dollar. The dollar obviously has become, Latin America has its political issues. I'm not being negative, I'm being realistic.
Yeah.
And our country has its issues, but I don't think, hopefully in the long run, this, you know, it's going to balance itself out. So I assume from a marketing point of view, the next panel will deal with that to some degree. We're getting some real good tailwinds here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm probably every week on a different city in Latin America and Europe. And, you know, the speech was, okay, we'll see. And now they're like, okay, give me the projects. I'm ready to go. How do I take my money to the US now? It doesn't matter if my currency went down 20% against the dollar, but I don't want to see it go another 20% before I make the move and get my kids out of here. Yeah, they know that there's some weird stuff in the economy happening in the US, but they don't care. They know it's going to come back at some point. They don't know if it's going to come back, and every single country out there in Latin America is going to become another Venezuela. So that's why they need to get out, and EB-5 is very relevant these days, even at $800,000.
Yes. Jim, your thoughts?
And most of our projects have 20 to 25% equity, common equity. Now other third-party people's money. Even somebody wants to put money in, who actually decline because their opportunity is so good. They don't want to give up those opportunities. That's number one. The number two, EB-5, roughly is always about 30 to 35%, roughly 1/3. Okay, because how can borrow money very easily. Okay. Finally, our project is always thinking about how to ensure investor gets their money back. How was generous enough? They offer corporate guarantee of the loan return from the borrower to the lender, not to the investor, with $1 billion asset balance sheet to guarantee that. That's why the project makes it very marketable.
That's very unusual to have a corporate, a substantial corporate guarantee of repayment of a loan, which is perfectly legal. And my immigration folks, Ron, no issue of a guarantee of a loan. That's not a guarantee of refund to the investor, right? No issue at all. Right, no issue, no immigration, or how good your balance sheet is, you can guarantee, somebody can guarantee a loan. That's, and I think Paul's capitalized on that.
Yeah, I also want to emphasize, how does that actually for two purposes. They also want to ensure they don't get into legal fight with anybody on their equity, because that's like 30% for 300 million project. That's like $80 million. They want to make sure the 80 million is safe as well.
Tom, any thoughts from your?
You know, we don't,
structure?
yeah, we don't structure deals. You know, we're part of the process of that conversation's happening, but we're seeing more and more creativity. I think we've talked about it. We're seeing, you know, EB-5 being looked at beyond just what it was traditionally looked at, which was just kind of a low rate and an immigration benefit, to now kind of inviting people to be part of the process of being an investor. So we're starting to see a little bit more of that. I do think that, and the conversation's been had around job creation. In the past, that was a really, you know, intense conversation of, you know, how do we have, we're not seeing that as much as we did in the past. I think the folks that wrote the bill were very smart and appreciated that there was certain language that needed to be put into the bill around set-asides for direct jobs, which I think made some people nervous. Like, do I need W-2 jobs now to met out my job creation expectations? And if you read further in the bill, the job creation can be set by economic methodology. So that's been kind of set. So I think most of the time what we're seeing on our side is there enough jobs to to cover the EB-5 portion, and do those jobs primarily come from construction activities. I think people feel much more safer knowing that the EB-5 portion is covered by expenditures as opposed to operations for all the reasons why we talked about already.
When it comes to capital stack, I don't think there's a one size fits all in real estate in general. It depends on the project, it depends on where it is in its own construction life cycle, where we step in, etc. So we, as I mentioned, we're a kind of a conservative firm, and we'd like to see around 30% equity in the deal, and we never like these dollars into the project. We like to piggyback on a senior loan. It just also increases its marketability, to be honest. I mean, mezzanine position adds that layer of kind of additional kind of component that just
Hey,
like
can you
makes it.
explain that? Because I know Ali had his own opinion on it. So getting into the.
Sure. So
Yeah.
basically, we have done senior loans as well, but that was an infrastructure project where kind of the land was the only thing that we could just hold on to. But in other cases, we just like basically having a mezzanine structure could be equally safe. If there's one strong senior loan and you're just having an intercreditor agreement with the senior lender, and then you just come in the mezzanine position. If the construction is going on, especially in master plan development, like we like to work a lot, there's a lot of asset that the JCE holds. So even if the senior lender has the prior position to be able to liquidate those assets if necessary, if the project defaults, you have the pledge of membership interest that the JCE holds in the greater project. So it still gives you something to bank on. Plus, if it's an ongoing project, obviously there's valuable assets in the project, et cetera. So I don't think there's one kind of a magic potion, oh, this works the best and the rest is not good. As long as you structure it well, you believe it in your underwriting and you can justify in a very kind of a solid terms, then nowadays it's very interesting that the investors are speaking more with our project underwriting team than they used to do before. We used to have these investor relations team to kind of dumb it down, so to say, to investors to be able to explain what it means. Now it's not necessary. Directly, this is a conversation where we explain our underwriting methodology directly to the investor or the finder, and they absorb that. And I think if you do projects right, this is a great way to sell because you just basically transparently tell them what you have done and why they should believe in you as well. And if they like it, they invest. If they don't, they don't.
Great comment. Two issues we want to talk about. It's been implied, but we should get into detail. Scalability. I'll explain to what scalability is. There's two types. There's multiple projects. I know you like scalability. One project is a vertical building, 20, 30, 50 stories. That's not scalable. It's vertical. It's all or nothing. You build a building and you better finish the building. It's not scalable. Now you have projects that are mixed use projects and they have phases. I know, Jim, your project had phases, your project. So talk about scalability and what benefit scalability has to some degree as to the capital stack. If you don't raise all the money, if you have a shortfall, or turning the money. And the second thing is rural urban. I would like to talk about your thoughts on rural urban because that's deal structuring too. And you both, I know you do both. A lot of you do both rural and urban. Go ahead, Mike.
Sure. So I'll actually start with the second part first, the rural versus urban. At the end of the day, you need a good deal. It has to make sense. You have to have a clear path to repaying investors, and you need a deal that's already fully baked. So the rural deals that we're focusing on, they're rural, but if you looked at it, you would say, oh, that actually makes sense. So one of the projects we launched is a neighborhood outside of Park City, Utah, really close to Salt Lake City and an international airport, top tourist destination, but the way it's categorized qualifies as rural. We have another neighborhood right outside of Atlanta, about a 45-minute drive
By the way,
away.
is that project scalable?
Yes, so but
Explain it. Go ahead.
in both of these deals, at least the rural ones for us, it's incredibly important that they're all scalable. We're not looking at any rural deals where it's a large single structure, where it's all or nothing, where you're building a 30-story skyscraper, you need all the money up front. One day you're going to turn the lights on, and at that point it better produce. So anything we're doing in the rural areas, it's master plan communities, it's modular, and it'll flex with the economy. So the other one in Atlanta, it's a adults community of 55 and over, small homes, 1,300 homes in total. They've already built 250 of them, have a waiting list. And it's really easy to continue to create jobs and churn through as we go through the economic cycle. So very different than that, as we're talking about the modular nature of it. We have an urban TEA project in Florida, in St. Petersburg, high-rise condominium deal, 35 stories tall. They've pre-sold all of the condos, so we have confidence. But that is one where if we were looking at it today, we probably would not start that project from the ground up. We would wait for all of the capital to be in place before we're interested in a project like that. So when looking at rural, we want low rise, mid rise, something that can scale over time, versus in an urban TEA, it's going to be a lot more dense. And that's where you'll see more of the single structure projects. Obviously still has to underwrite, but that's how we're looking at things.
Yeah, from the projects that we've done is basically one-offs every time. We actually have a project coming up a couple of blocks from here, TA. That we toyed with the option of doing scalability because it's a more of a hotel, it's an entertainment destination where you have two buildings. One of them is purely party and Miami life, and the other one is the actual hotel that is known for nightlife. So, but at the end of the day, we decided, you know what, let's put it all into one package. That way investors can benefit from having a diversified income streams from the food and beverage tower, as well as the hotel tower. So we just didn't end up doing it like in phases. On the rural versus non-rural, we don't, you know, we look at everything. And I would go a little bit further and say, we even do non-TEA, and we've seen with some investors that are sophisticated, they rather come in a non-TEA because they feel more secure about the project in a zone or a geographic area where there's a lot of development and action, and not in a more secluded or TEA zone that's it doesn't give them confidence.
Yeah, it's interesting. The fact that you're a non-TA, you could be in the best location in the country. Let's understand. It's kind of
And the difference for an investor making this decision.
you're not, yeah. The other thing on non-TA, I just want to mention, I commented on this a while ago. If you pay, if you do the mathematics, how much is an extra non-TA? It's $250,000 more. So the issue becomes, how do you incentivize an investor to get a higher rate of return? And that's 2%, pay them extra 2 points, do the math.
That's right.
You pay them an extra 2 points on the entire amount. You look at the rate of return on the 250, it's really not a bad rate of return on their money.
Right. So yeah, we did some of a study, and then investors were open to do the $1,050,000 on a interesting project on a really good geographic area.
You probably gave them a good return. I bet you gave them a better return.
Yeah, definitely. Just like you said, 2% more.
Listen to me. Go ahead, Jim.
Most of the whole project are mixed use, always have office, hotel, and residence, and some even like with city and park and other stuff. The project we worked on right now, we're finishing up, is about 105 million EB-5 total raise. We're almost finished. It's a Hilton Curio Hotel, plus the most expensive luxury condo in Dallas, Texas, plus retail. Because of Texas alcohol rule, Saul is a big wine production company in California. They couldn't own the retail because of the ownership strategy, so have to have 3 different EB-5 loans. Some are cross collateralized, some are not. Okay, so that's requires a lot of creative thinking from Ronnie and the team here.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, we can write it up however, you know, it needs to go. I think if you're going to do scalability, I think it's best to let USCIS know upfront. You know,
You show all the phases.
yeah, write it all up front, and you can even say, hey, our master plan is this. But for the purposes of this business plan, here's what we're going to do. And then it makes it really easy to come back with the next phase in your business plan, because now you're just updating the master plan with the next phase.
So if there's 3 phases, you can show the jobs for each phase.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I would suggest, is that you show a breakdown of job creation for each phase, and then it's really easy to go back out to market. And then we're just doing either a slight update or even an addendum to the business plan to kind of give current state. I think as it relates to rural deals, and the conversation's been had already, is, but the project has to be reasonable for its area. And I think somebody else on the other panel mentioned that if you're in rural area, it's going to cost a little bit more. And not only is it going to cost a little bit more, but your job creation actually goes down because job creation is all based on economic impact. So if there's not a lot of money bouncing around in that economy as it is, you can't expect there to be this great big job multiplier. So we're seeing job multipliers in urban areas of being, say, for example, 18 jobs per $1 million spent, go all the way down to 13 jobs when you're going to hit into a rural area. So you'll see a little bit of, you're structuring that deal. You may see, well, I got to pay a little bit more. I'm going to get, but my job creation doesn't, equally increase that. You might end up, even a little bit less than what you thought in your urban area.
I mean, as I mentioned, I mean, we love master plan development, we love scalability. Also, that gives that's also an attractive point for the developer as well. When you talk about that option and flexibility that you can actually fundraise more in the following phases, it just becomes even more attractive. And then it also gives you an additional outlet for redeployment as well. So a lot of different kind of, I think, advantages for like phase projects. That's why I like it a lot. When you talk about rural versus urban TA, we're based in California. I mean, it's if it's rural in California, you probably never heard of it. It's just a lot of places that are.
Is Napa Valley rural? I'm serious, is Napa Valley rural?
Most of it not.
No.
Oh, really?
No, most of it not. There are very small pockets around.
Is Sonoma rural? Is Sonoma rural?
No.
Oh, we're gonna get some wine out of this.
So it's tough. And I mean, just because we like California, we know California, but we kind of expanded our underwriting on that. And it has been difficult. Structuring rural projects are difficult, make it pencil, and for us to believe in it doesn't happen immediately. So we're structuring a few options, but it has been a challenge, to be honest, because we know urban projects really well. That's our kind of forte. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, by the way, just for record, there's really a handful of, we're involved in a lot of rural deals, fortunately, and they're terrific. If you have a luxury resort that's a destination and you're totally, the economy is irrelevant because the nature of the people going there, they can afford anything. And it's rural. That's kind of a cool deal where you have a well-known, and they sell out in this phase too. Usually it's a hotel with residential. We're seeing the hotel and residential model across the board, and EB-5 has been a really good combination today, especially in resorts, high-end resorts. I'm not talking about the limited service hotels that you go on, where you're mainly doing 120 units, 130 hotel units. So you're building low-rise hotels, right?
Yeah, mostly our hotels is about 200 units.
Okay, but it's urban.
Yeah, urban, yeah.
And it's not high-rise, and it's,
Yeah.
So if you're doing a massive project, it's really neat to have the scalability of being able to have the residential sales. And so in luxury resorts, there's a handful of them being done in the country today. I think they're extremely successful, especially as Ron Glasgow said, if you're going to the Chinese market, they really like that. The second, again, I mentioned before is you're going to see a lot more ESG projects, I think, and they're going to be, and the question is that infrastructure? That is an interesting issue because if you're working with the government and they're involved with you and you're doing ESG, and does that get you infrastructure credit? If you're doing a transportation hub, other deals we're looking at, transportation hubs are where and you're creating a transportation depot to drop off. The train comes into A, the train stops, the product is then loaded onto trucks and the trucks go elsewhere. And this is all ESG because it's much cheaper to do it this way than to do it the other way. And you're setting up a depot with affordable housing and joined on that. So those are things that we're going to see biofuel. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. I think the ESG is really interesting. You may get expedited processing, you may not, but if it's government oriented and you can have transportation department or the environmental agency start saying this is great, please do it. Anything within energy, you think you may get expedited processing. So just a little comment there. We didn't talk about job pushing. One of you folks talk about, I know jobs are plentiful, but what do you each budget as a job cushion as a minimum requirement?
At this point, like most of our projects, we're gonna create multiples of the job needed, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6
So
times the
irrelevant.
job needed. So for us, it's not really relevant. If it's a deal where it's anything tight, like there's plenty of good deals out there, it probably doesn't make sense for us.
From our point of view, every time I send Tom an address and a business plan, he comes back with the job creation, and most of the times I'm surprised because we have at least double of what we need.
Same. No issue.
You have no issue because you're being conservative in the EB-5 race.
Exactly.
Because I know in the old days, if you're building a high rise, you create a lot of jobs, but if you're raising a lot of EB-5 money, it used to be like a 20%. And then I guess it depends upon whether it's construction jobs, which are a lot safer. And you know, if you build a building, you're all done. And I know the old model used to be, if you could get all your jobs created by construction, 100%, according to the new requirements. I mean, you know what I mean by that. And then the operational jobs are the throw-in, that gets you a lot safer. So we were seeing those models. But I don't know if, but it seems like the jobs are much easier today with the extra 60%.
Yeah, we haven't had anybody in a long time push us on the job creation. We're usually getting it there, and you know, 800,000 gives you a much more than what we had before, 500K. So
Same. I mean, it's just like, obviously Tom does our work on it, and it's tremendous. I mean, it's with the $800,000 ticket, it's much easier to do this. And if you're really struggling for jobs in this environment, I think you're maybe structuring the project wrong. So maybe just like go back to square one.
What's your biggest competition? What do you say? And each of you, what would you say when you're doing your structuring? What are you competing against, and how do you deal with the competition on that? I know there's friendly competition because there's plenty of room to go around, but you still got as you said, there's a lot of deals in the market. Not a lot as it used to be, but there's a lot of good deals out there. How do you compete against that?
Yeah, and I think that's really important now because with the new law and EB-5 being at 800,000, we're seeing a lot more flavors of deals out there. So we're seeing equity deals, we're seeing higher return deals, you're seeing rural deals, there's normal TEA. So really, I'd say now it's not as much a competition, but it's just one size doesn't fit all. Historically, you would have a middle of the fairway deal that just worked and made sense. And now I'd say there's 4 or 5 different types of investors, depending on how sophisticated they are, if they're an entrepreneur at home, if they demand return. And just in the current environment, there's lots of different ways you need to be thinking about structuring deals to meet each market. And if you only have 1 project or 2 projects, it might not work in certain markets. A project that works really well in LATAM, you might take it to India or China and it just doesn't resonate the same way, and vice versa. You might have a project that sells great in China and you go down to LATAM and you show it to investors and they're like, I don't like this one.
Yeah, on our experiences, we don't think about the competition much. We just focus on the project. But what I've seen within our projects is like, the sexier the project, even if it's not as safe as other project, the better it sells. So investors really like sexy projects. Yeah.
Actually, the blocking and tackling is probably the safest. We never mentioned that, but we should talk, by the way, asset class too. We never even mentioned multifamily, which probably from a real estate point of view, multifamily rental may be one of the safest assets, with housing is valuable, and multifamily, anything with residences really creates there's a speed you can finance. You can always finance multifamily. That's a one asset class with the government sponsored programs that gives you a little benefit. So go ahead, keep going down the road. Any other comments on this question? Aaron, from your point of view, competition, you don't worry about it?
Well, I mean, I think historically, before the kind of interest rates spiked, the main competition for us in the capital stack was the developers' opportunity cost and what else they can just basically place without the EB-5, and whether or not they're interested in taking the like immigration investment risk whatsoever, or they just like use another method to finance the project. And so I think that's the main competition, whether or not your project is attractive enough. Nowadays, I don't think we have much competition. It's just like I think overall EB-5 industry is now cheaper than the developer's own equity. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't see much competition here. It's just the competition is to find the right projects and go and sell
By
it.
the way, that's a great comment. I forgot you're competing with other capital markets. And right now, EB-5 is competing well. I'm going to take Roberto's got some questions. By the way, talk about preferred too. We haven't mentioned preferred versus loan. You may want to comment, but go
No,
ahead.
I'm not on the panel, so I'm not gonna take the mic. I have a real question for my colleagues, which is, so Ali talked about seniors, right? But the biggest issue that I see with senior is that typically investors, especially agents, where a lot of the volume comes from, and if you're doing a senior, it's gonna have to be a bigger raise, like to see the project under construction, right? And so that's something that we haven't talked about is in the deal structuring, and it's a question I have for you guys. How often are you coming in to replace a bridge? And now bridge rates are starting to get higher and higher, and now you're adding way more sunk financing costs to the project. And so it's like, you know, agents or investors, they like that they want to see the jobs already created, they want to have their cake. But at what point is that now risking their capital return because there's so much sunk financing costs in the project now due to that bridge loan? So that's just the question I have for you guys.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. So for us, whenever we look at a deal, number one priority, immigration safety. How do you make sure that it's safe from an immigration perspective? The jobs are already created. So for us, that's table stakes. If the jobs aren't created in the deal, not interested in bringing it to market, we can structure it, but we'll sit on the sidelines and wait and ensure that it's actually happening. And how do we balance that with the extra financing costs? A lot of the time we're expecting the developer, we work with developers with very large balance sheets. They have to eat that. They're getting really cheap capital and they're going to have to come up with a little bit more out of pocket at first as they're working to secure the senior loan. So for us, I tend to agree. We prefer deals that do have senior loans in there because that makes the project viable with or without EB-5. We've looked at some deals where EB-5 can be senior and the deal can still work if not all the money's raised, but to us, that's a pretty big risk. So number one priority, immigration safety, jobs created, deal actually happens, and the rest of it still has to paper.
For us, you know, the relationships we have with the banks, we understand in their balance sheet how much they can carry for hospitality within one sponsor, right? So if we replace a lot or all of the senior facility, that allows us to get that senior facility into another project from the same bank and just roll it.
Great. But I guess my understanding of bridge loans and replacing is that it has to be short-term debt that you're replacing the EB-5 side. Short-term debt, I guess a conservative understanding of that would be 2 years. Most senior construction loans are at least 2 years plus another year that they give you to stabilize and refi out. So, I mean, what's the kind of guidance that you've gotten there?
No, we come in and they're fully aware of what we're trying to do to replace their dollars probably faster than what they're expecting. But they know we have also the volume of deals that they're interested on putting their dollars, so we can just roll it over to our next deal. We understand that some of the times that's the great thing about EB-5 is that frees up money that the bank is willing and able to give us if we free it up, right, with the EB-5. So
Yeah.
that works well.
Yeah, do me a favor, Rowan, I want to give you the floor for a second. We're talking bridge funding. This is complicated. So the question became in the audience, look, you have senior debt, and you want your lenders, sometimes the developer and the lender is going to put in the money. It could be lender equity, borrower equity, it could be senior debt, and EB-5 comes in and takes it out. And I know there's confusion, let me call it confusion, as to what bridge means. Now let's understand, the seniors lending and lending and lending, are you repaying the last dollars in? That's a 1 or 2 year time period. Rowan is going to comment on this. Can you, this is a very complicated issue. And Tom, we deal with it in our structuring all the time. So why don't you explain it, please?
So the idea is in the policy manual, and what USCS has actually pronounced is if there is temporary financing utilized and there was an intent that the temporary financing would be taken out, not necessarily by EB-5, just by some other form of financing down the line, it's permissible. We've had that interpretation. We've been using that interpretation for a long time. However, in 2019, the agency then took a turn and said that temporary financing, bridge financing cannot exceed a year. And so that obviously became a problem because there is nowhere in the policy manual there was no other sort of pronouncement outside of a public stakeholder call and some RFPs that we saw that said this particular policy. So now we're trying to figure out what that means. RIA USA, to its credit, wrote a very detailed list of complaints, this being one of them, analyzed it very strongly and just, depth. It was about 3 pages of analysis saying, hey, USCIS, how exactly does this work from a bridge finance perspective? Because there's nothing in the policy manual that tells us that. So to my knowledge, we've not seen any resolution of this topic. We are aware that there is litigation going on this. Our advice on this particular issue has been till date, like, look, if you want to be conservative, do not try and take out capital that's more than a year old. It becomes very complicated if you're in a 3-year development phase and you're spending capital on, let's say, 2020, 2021, 22. So if we want to stick with the 1-year rule, you would just go back about 12 months and then try and take
Is it
that.
12 months from when you start the EB-5 funding?
No, 12 months from when you spend.
Okay,
That's the issue, right? So
it's a rolling target.
it's a rolling target. So we've had some deals that roll it over time and say, okay, we'll just have multiple short-term notes and then eventually just pay down those notes over a 12-month period. Some people take the more aggressive position, which is correct to take, in my view, where they'll say, we'll start it from the date of actually development phase, because then USCI should not be able to say anything because the policy manual doesn't. But
Okay.
it's open.
And this is why we have broken on speed.